Hey guys, tonight we're cracking open a cold one from the pasta crusty, disease-ridden straw mattress kind of past. That's right, tonight we travel back to medieval times. Imagine this, you open your eyes to the itchy poke of hay jabbing, through a linen sheet that's more stained than fabric. The air smells like something died in the corner last week. Maybe it did. A chicken is sitting unbothered beside your head, and the thing rustling under your bedroll, or just a rat the size of a toddler's shoe, nibbling on something suspiciously squishy. You probably won't survive this. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, let me know where you're watching from and what time it is. There. I love seeing how global this sleepy little club is. Now, dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey. Together, you wake up groggy, with your back screaming from sleeping on tightly packed straw that hasn't been changed since winter. It's crawling with fleas. Not metaphorically, literally crawling. Your skin itches. Your eyes are already swollen from the smoky air. And someone outside is yelling about pigs being stolen again. Medieval mornings don't start with coffee. They start with cold, unless you're in the heat of summer, in which, case congratulations, your bed is now a damp sauna of sweat and animal dander. You stretch and immediately regret it. Your joints ache and your blanket smells like fermented barn. You'd like to splash water on your face, but the only basin is filled with cloudy, reused water from the day before. Hygiene. It's a word that hasn't been invented yet. Toothbrush. Nope. Soap. Sort of. It's more of a gritty, waxy lump made from lye and animal fat. It burns if it gets in your eyes, which it will. You shuffle to the corner of the single room. Cottage you share with 5 other people and, maybe a go-tanned relieve. Yourself into a clay chamber pot that will be dumped into the street later. Yes, into the actual street. No sewage system here, just a watch-your-step policy and a lot of flies. Historians still argue whether peasants really dumped waste daily or waited until nightfall, but either way, there's a reason everyone wore wooden shoes with thick soles. Breakfast? Not yet. First, you have to check your feet for infection. Why? Because you stepped on something sharp in the field yesterday, and there's no neosporin in sight. If your wound turns red and swells, you're in trouble. People lose limbs here just from splinters. And speaking of infections, you scratch your head and come away with a louse. You're everywhere. In your clothes, your hair, your bedding. A medieval study, yes, there are a few revealed that even royalty had lice combs. Imagine the peasants. Now you fumble into your clothes. Or rather, the one linen undertunic you own, and the single wool overtunic you're expected to wear every day. They stink. They're stiff with old sweat. You have no underwear? Sorry. And remember that shoes are a luxury if you're lucky. You've got leather slippers with holes in the soles. Otherwise, barefoot it is, even in winter. Outside, the mud path is thick with, you guessed it, more waste, rotting food, and the occasional chicken feather. A neighbor waves. Her teeth are mostly gone, and she's rubbing a poultice made from mashed leeks on her swollen eye. You try not to breathe through your nose. The village air is a stew of smoke, manure, body odor, and something oddly fishy even though you're nowhere near the coast, and you're already late. The sun's barely up, but people have been working since dawn. The Lord Steward makes the rounds, reminding everyone that this week's grain tax is due. He's flanked by 2 men with cudgels. You don't argue. You get a whiff of breakfast, watery porridge. That's it. Maybe you'll get a crust of yesterday's bread, but you've got to be careful. It's rock hard and could crack a molar. And before you eat, you pray a lot. The church isn't just watching, it's always watching. No one here is an atheist, at least not openly. Belief isn't a lifestyle, it's survival, the only thing. More terrifying than your daily chores is the threat of eternal damnation. So yes, you kneel. On a dirt floor, in front of a wooden cross. Even if your knees are scraped and you're too hungry to concentrate. Historians still argue whether faith was genuinely personal for peasants or more a performance of necessity, but either way, skipping prayers isn't a great idea. The church has spies and creative punishments. One quirky detail most people forget: you probably have your own wooden spoon. Not for cooking, just for eating. People didn't share utensils much. It was one of the few things you'd own your whole life. Sometimes they were carved with little symbols or initials. Yours is cracked, like your lips, like your patience. And that brings us back to the smell, because you can't escape it. Bathing is rare. Depending on the region, it's seasonal, maybe even ceremonial. Public baths used to be a thing in older times, but by this point in the Middle Ages, those are shutting down fast, blamed for moral corruption and outbreaks of plague. So you stew in your own funk and the communal funk. And the livestock funked all this. And it's only been 10 minutes since you opened your eyes. You hear a bell in the distance. That's your signal to shuffle off for your morning tasks. Coffee in hand, no podcast in your ears, just the weight of the same exact day you lived yesterday, and the creeping suspicion your rash is getting worse. Welcome to your new life. You're not special. You're not a knight or a monk. You're not a merchant or even an apprentice. You're just another face in a muddy village with rotten teeth. And fleas for friends? And honestly, you're already thinking about lying back down. If only the rat would scoot over. You trudge back into your one-room hovel, every muscle protesting, and find the village cook stoking a smoky hearth. The air feels thicker, herewood smoke, stale manure, the unmistakable temps of last night's porridge caked onto a cast gear. Cauldron. Your stomach growls, but honestly, it probably has more faith in that growl than it does in this morning's breakfast. The cook ladles out a watery brew of barely split barley gruel into chipped wooden bowls. It looks more like pond water than food, and it smells like slightly charred straw. You pick up your spoon, your only personal possession besides that cracked bowl, and realize it's carved from you wood, gifted by your grandmother when you turned 5. You chew on it absent-mindedly. Nothing says medieval luxury like an heirloom utensil you dip the spoon in. Lucio sludge, lukewarm sludge. Second taste, faint sour note that makes you question if they actually baked this yesterday, or if it's just another stew left to ferment. Mainstream historians note that gruel made from barley or oats was the staple for peasants, especially during lean seasons, porridge being easier to cook in large batches and stretch over more mouths. Yet honestly, can stretching a single barley grain over 20 people make it taste any better? Historians still argue whether the addition of small amounts of milk or butter was common or reserved solely for holidays. Since dairy was often turned into cheese for easier storage, you force a mouthful down, grinding the bits of chaff that somehow survive the milling process. Chewing feels like gnawing on damp cardboard. You swallow and chase it with a gulp of cloudy water, hoping it masks the aftertaste. Doesn't. Your throat scratches as if you've just swallowed sand. Between bites, you shift your posture, trying to ease the ache in your back. Aware of the church's watchful eye, you bow your head and mumble the morning prayer taught to you since childhood. You're supposed to give thanks to God for sustaining your life and the miracle of another day. Instead, you silently wonder if God is busy somewhere else right now, maybe making coffee for the angels. Once you finish chewing, the steward's bell clangs through the village, signaling the end of grace. You set your spoon down, lean back, and survey the room. A couple of neighbors are drizzling vinegar over their gruel, claiming it improves digestion or at least makes the flavor less like old boots. Vinegar wasn't just a condiment. Some believed it purified water, a quirky remedy mentioned in rural herbals. Others swore that adding a few crushed herbs, yarrow, nettle, a pinch of pennyroyal could ward off indigestion or even seasickness. Fringe sources claim certain villagers mixed in roasted earthworms to get protein. You're pretty sure that's an embellishment, but hey, those worms do scuttle faster than your village dog, so maybe they pack a punch. You remember how, last winter, old Martha swore her gruel was cured of evil humors because she threw. In a handful of fairy wort, she swore she'd foraged under a full moon. Historians still argue whether such folk practices were widespread or merely the eccentricities of a few isolated souls. The cook comes around tapping empty bowls with a ladle. More, she asks. You shake your head. If you eat more, you'll be too busy belching to haul manure later, and you should be grateful. Some weeks, there simply isn't enough grain to go around, and you'd be thrilled to have something hot in your belly at all. But the wreck of your breakfast doesn't exactly fill you with zeal for the day. You attempt to wash your bowl but end up with more grit in it than before. Water's too precious to change often, and the basin's murky from last night's rinse. You think about how in urban centers like London or Paris, wealthier folk enjoyed a variety of breads, rye, wheat, even courtly custards in porcelain bowls, while you're downing what amounts to medieval wallpaper paste. You look at your neighbors. Faces, hollowed cheeks, dull eyes. If your village had a motto, it'd probably be, "We're alive." Then there's the religious side. You're required at dawn prayers, mid-morning prayers, noon prayers, afternoon prayers, vespers, compline, 6 times a day, give or take. Your gruel is practically a sacrament by the time you swallow it, because kneeling afterward for prayer feels even worse than the meal. Your knees hit the dirt floor, and you wonder if calling in sick is an option, except you know. That atheist didn't exist here, at least not publicly. Skipping prayer is an invitation for scorn, or worse, penance. Penance could be anything from fasting to wearing a hair shirt or carrying a candle procession at dawn. One local fellow had to stand in the stream for 3 hours as punishment soaking his tunic while everyone threw insults from the bank. Historians still argue whether such penances were actually enforced by the church or simply suggested by local priests craving a bit of spectacle. You finish the final mouthful, swallow with effort, and stand up.
Oh.
Your stomach rumbles again, mockingly. Fine. You're ready to face the fields now. But before you go, you pause by the cottage door, watching the smoke drift past the crooked thatch roof. A gull squawks overhead because somewhere beyond these muddy lanes, there's a river and a distant sea, places you'll never see. For a brief second, you imagine a breakfast feast. Eggs, cheese, fresh bread, maybe even fish, delivered raw and sizzling. Feels like a dream. Instead, you tighten your belt, slip on your battered shoes, and step out into the morning light, knowing that the only offerings you'll get today are sweat, toil, and the promise that tomorrow's gruel might taste slightly less like regret. You shuffle into the fields where the grass is still wet with dewar, possibly pig urine. Honestly, it's hard to tell anymore. The sky's just turning from gray to a brighter gray, and the wind carries that roarth scent, equal parts hopeful and moldy. Your feet squish in the mud, and your toes curl instinctively, maybe to keep warm, maybe to avoid stepping on another sharp pebble. You're a serf, which means in the most generous terms you belong to the land, not in a poetic, homey sense, more like a shovel or a cow. You don't get paid. You don't get to leave. You work the Lord's fields, maintain the roads, repair fences, and occasionally serve as impromptu furniture at feasts. You're basically a Swiss Army knife with chronic back pain. First job today, turn the compost pile, which in medieval terms means digging through weeks of rotted manure, spoiled hay, food scraps, and whatever else people tossed into the corner of the field. The smell is spiritual. It's like something has died and been reborn, then died again just to spite you. You grab a pitchfork with a cracked handle and get to work. The sun hasn't even cleared the hills, but your arms already ache. No safety boots. It's just you, your questionable shoes, and a thin layer of hope. This isn't tetanus between you and a world of spiky surprises, eh? Nearby farmer yells something about a loose sheep. You glance over. It's already halfway up the hill. Definitely not your problem, and yet, somehow, it becomes your problem within 10 minutes. By mid-morning, you've scraped your hand twice, developed a new blister, and swallowed a gnat. Maybe. 2, you wish you had water, but the bucket's at the other end of the field, and you're still haunted by yesterday's bout of suspicious stomach cramps. Drinking from the communal well is like playing digestive Russian roulette. One day it's safe, the next. Surprise, you've got bloody flux. And the village healer suggests holding a dried toad in your mouth for relief. Historians still argue. Whether medieval peasants truly believed in such folk remedies, or if they simply had no other options. But when your choices are toad tongue, or dying of dehydration, well, welcome to improvisational medicine. You keep working. The sun climbs. Your tunic sticks to your back, which is now officially a swamp. You feel something crawling down. Your leg flea or sweat beetle? Doesn't matter. You slap it and keep digging. Around you others swing scythes in practiced arcs, cutting wheat like it insulted their families. There's no chatter, no jokes. Just the rhythmic rasp of tools and the occasional grunt when someone throws out their back. Again, you think of knights. Of all the images you've seen on old tapestries, shiny armor, heroic stances, plumes fluttering in the breeze, not your life. You'll never see armor unless you count the crusty calluses forming on your palms. Even if you could be a knight, you'd need noble birth, a squire's training, a war horse, and about 17 family connections. You can't even afford a comb? One quirky fringe fact. Some lords use geese as natural field weeders. Gaggle of squawking, feathered lawnmowers would be released to gobble up pests and stomp weeds. You remember the time your neighbor tried it? Geese got into his house, terrorized the cat, and pooped on his tools. They were delicious, though. By noon, it's time for your first break, which means crouching under a tree for 7 minutes and gnawing on half a turnip. You sit on a flat rock, stare at the horizon, and wonder if the Lord even knows your name. Probably not. To him, you're that muddy one with the limp. And speaking of the Lord, he occasionally rides by just to check on his fieldzor, show off his imported leather boots. He never stops, doesn't wave, just nods to his steward and keeps going. But his eyes, sharp and unreadable, sweep across you all, judging, measuring, you. Stand as soon as he passes. 'Tis slow, and you'll get accused of laziness. Again, one of your neighbors, Wilkin, mutters under his breath about a dream he had of fleeing to the woods, living off berries and mushrooms, escaping this life for good. You glance around, half tempted. But then you remember the last guy who ran. The bailiff caught him 2 villages over. They made him dig a new latrine with his bare hands. Took a week, then find his family a chicken. Historians still argue whether serfs were truly bound for life or had legal mechanisms to buy freedom. Technically, you could buy your way out. In practice, you'd need more coin than you've seen in your entire life. Back to work. You rotate to the wheat field now, scything and binding, stacking the sheaves into rough pyramids. Each cut of the blade reverberates through your spine. Every hour brings anew a cleft shoulder, right elbow, both thighs, even your fingers. How do fingers hurt this much? There's no union, no overtime. If you're lucky, you might finish. Before a dusk and not collapse face first into a ditch, the bell clangs again. That's your cue to finish up this section and drag the bundles to the shed. You know the steward will be checking counts. If you've bundled to Fjord sloppily, you risk a fine. In bread, or worse, in labor. Extra days, they call it. Like there's anything extra about scraping mud out of a pig trough on your supposed day of rest. By the time you stumble home, you're sunburned, blistered, and about 2 pounds lighter from sheer sweat. You haven't even had a proper meal. Your reward. The promise of more back-breaking work tomorrow, and maybe if the gods are kind, extra chunk of dried bread to chew until your jaw cramps. You're parched. That kind of dry-mouth desperation that makes you think of puddles and even raw potatoes with longing. The sun's been pounding down on your head all afternoon like it's got something personal against you, and the sweat dripping into your eyes only adds insult to fatigue. Naturally, your first thought is to drink some water, unfortunately. This is medieval Europe, and that's a terrible idea. You make your way to the village well, eyeing it like it's both a salvation and a threat, which, in fairness, it is. It's made of rough-hewn stone, with a splintered wooden bucket that's seen more rope patches than your shoes. A young girl is drawing water, her arms shaking from the weight. You nod at her. She nods back, then promptly drops the bucket, which splashes into the water below with a dull plop. The sigh that escapes your throat is less disappointment and more existential crisis. See, in the Middle Ages, clean water is more myth than reality. The village well is used for everything: drinking, cooking, sometimes washing, on unfortunate occasions, waste disposal by people too lazy to walk to the dumping pit. You once heard about a man who fell into a well while drunk and spoiled the entire village's water supply for a week. They still talk about it like it was a military disaster. Historians still argue whether people in the Middle Ages knew the water was dangerous, or if they just blamed bad smells and poor luck. There's evidence that towns with access to running water, like aqueduct-fed cities or monasteries, had lower rates of disease, but peasants, you're playing hydration roulette. You eye the bucket, now full again, ripples stilling on the surface. The water looks vaguely green. You sniff it. There's something sour. But your lips are cracked, your head's spinning, and your choices are limited. You drink 2 gulps in, and you already regret it. To be fair, not everyone drank straight from the well. That's where ale comes in, specifically small beer. It's a weak, barely alcoholic brew, made mostly to purify the water by boiling it during the brewing process. But you can't just brew beer casually. It takes grain, time, and usually a designated brewer. Your village has one, Old Tom, who smells like yeast and disappointment. He only makes a few barrels a week, and most of it goes to the steward and the church. You once tried to sneak some just to sip after hauling stones for 3 hours. You were caught. Your punishment? Cleaning the fish drying racks in the sunniest, smelliest corner of the village for 2 days straight. After that, even the muddy well water seemed like a gift from heaven. One quirky trick the midwife swears by is boiling fennel seeds in water and then letting it sit in the sun. She calls it a cleansing tonic. You tried it once. It tasted like bitter soup and did nothing to stop the 3-day sprinting stomach you got afterward. Another neighbor, Jory, claims he once saw a noblewoman drink only rainwater collected in silver bowls because silver kills illness. You're pretty sure he made that up, but hey, man owns 3 teeth and a pet ferret named Beans. So anything's possible. You sit near the well for a moment, letting your legs recover, and staring at the chickens pecking lazily in the dust. A dog sniffs your foot, realizes you have no food, and trots away. It's deeply unimpressed. And that's when the cramps hit. It starts in your stomach, a slow twist. Like someone coiled a rope around your intestines and pulled gently at first. Then, with enthusiasm, you exhale through gritted teeth, trying not to moan. Around you, no one reacts. Everyone has been here. It's like a rite of passage. One good drink from the bad bucket, and you're officially part of the village digestive. Club, the walk home is less a walk and more a determined shuffle mixed with regret and crossed fingers. You make it to your doorstep and collapse onto the bench outside, hands pressed against your gut. Someone walks by and offers you a knowing look, as if to say, "Yep, that well strikes again." And here's the kicker. You'll probably do it again. Tomorrow, 'cause boiling water takes time and firewood is scarce. Small beer is rationed tighter than royal secrets. Historians still argue whether the average villager understood the value of boiling water regularly. Some believe communal knowledge existed, passed down through generations and reinforced by church teachings or monastic influence. Others argue that poverty, fuel scarcity, and daily exhaustion made best practices impossible. You lean toward the latter. You're too tired to follow a 5-step water purification ritual when you can barely feel your legs. Later that evening, you try to sip a bit of elderflower Timor, a hot infusion than actual flavor. But it's weak and lukewarm, served in a wooden mug that leaks from a crack near the base. Catch the drips in your palm and lick it off like a desperate stray. Dignity left the building 2 stomach aches ago, and yet, water is life. You need it. Your body screams for it, even when it turns traitor and poisons you from the inside. You envy the monks who have deep stone cisterns and access to spring-fed basins, or the rich merchants in towns who can afford filtered rainwater or imported wine. You're stuck with what the bucket gives, so you lie back on your cot feeling the churn in your belly like a storm brewing at sea. You pull your scratchy blanket over your shoulders and let out a soft groan. Tomorrow, you'll have to haul hay, and maybe if you're lucky you won't throw up into it. But tonight, you're just another peasant trying to survive. One dangerously suspicious sip at a time. It starts as a dull throb behind your teeth. It's a tiny nagging reminder that something isn't quite right. You poke your tongue against a molar and feel the unmistakable squish of soft decay. Welcome to medieval dental care. We're the only professional with access to tools as the local blacksmith, and he's better at horseshoes than human skulls. You try to ignore it. Everyone has a sore tooth now and then. But by mid-morning, the pain is no longer ignoble. It pulses, sharp and hot, like a tiny devil is jabbing your gum with a red-hot needle. You rub your jaw and wince. Congratulations, you've officially entered the slow, painful spiral of medieval dental doom. There is no toothbrush, no toothpaste, no floss. At best, you might chew on a twig, a frayed stick of ash or willow if you're fancy. Some villagers even believe that rubbing your teeth with crushed salt or charcoal helps. But that's mostly reserved for people who can afford luxuries like salt and charcoal. You're burning it for heat, not scrubbing your molars. You vaguely remember the traveling tooth drawer who passed through last summer. He had a suspicious grin, a cart full of rusted tools, and a loud sales pitch that included the phrase, "I remove your pain or your money back." Someone swore he was a barber surgeon. Someone else swore he used to be a juggler. He left with a pouch of coins and a trail of whimpers from half the village. Historians still argue whether dental care in the Middle Ages was widespread among lay people or restricted to clergy and elites. Monasteries had rudimentary herbal treatments, including tinctures made from clove or mint, but out here in the muddy wilds, you're more likely to get a prayer than a poultice. Desperate, you ask old Maud if she has anything for toothache. She squints at you, rubs her chin thoughtfully, then hands you a soggy cloth soaked in vinegar and sage. You bite it. Tastes like regret and pickled moss. Regret does nothing. She suggests tying a frog to your jaw, just a small one to draw out the bad humors. You decline. Barely by evening, the pain spreads to your head. Your temple throbs. Eye socket feels like it's filling with pressure. Your mouth tastes metallic. You look in the burnished metal shard you call a mirror and notice that your cheek is swollen. You're lopsided now. Symmetry is for the rich, and this is where it gets dicey. Because when teeth rot in the Middle Ages, they don't just quietly fall out like in cartoons. They abscess, they infect, they spread. You're one bad molar away from sepsis. One quirky fact. Some folks believe toothache was caused by worms. Literal worms that burrowed into your enamel and writhed around, causing agony. Treatments included smoke blown into your mouth through a funnel to coax them out. You're not making that up? People genuinely lit dried herbs henbane. For instance, Sand tried to smoke out the invisible invaders. Someone tried it last. They nearly set their beard on fire. You lie down on your straw mattress, face turned to the wall, pressing a cloth soaked in cold water against your cheek. It's not helping, but it's all you've got. You think about the nearest place. With real medical help, the monastery 3 villages away. But you can't leave without permission. You're not walking 10 miles with a face that feels like it's trying to explode. Eventually, you consider your worst option, the blacksmith. He's strong, he's got tongs, and he once pulled a bad tooth out of a pig. Same principle, right? You limp over in the dark, clutching your jaw like it might fall off. He's drinking ale, of course. You explain the situation. He doesn't even flinch. He gestures to a stump near the forge, pulls out a pair of iron pincers and mutters, "Hold still." You don't. You squirm. You panic. You scream. Eventually, you sit down, hands clenched on your knees, and let him pry your mouth open. He doesn't wash the tool, doesn't give you anything for the pain, grabs the bad tooth and pulls. Feels like your entire skull is being yanked. Sideways, there's a pop, then a crack, then the unmistakable squelch of blood. You black out for a second. When you come to, the tooth is in his handle, along with a sliver of gum, possibly some bone. You spit red onto the dirt floor. He pats your shoulder, like he's just fixed a wagon, no stitches, no antiseptic, just spit and cloth, and maybe a slug of ale if you're lucky. Historians still argue whether these impromptu dental removals shortened lives or simply delayed worse infections. Some say the real danger came afterward, Open wounds in the mouth often led to fevers, sepsis, or even lockjaw. You don't know all that. You just know you feel lighter, not in a good way. You walk home slowly, cradling your jaw. The pain is duller now, but it's joined by nausea, lightheadedness, and a strong sense that you've just survived a minor torture session. Your neighbors don't ask. They see the blood on your collar and nod. You've all been there. You collapse. Onto your mat, curling into a ball, wondering if the tooth was cursed, if you'll get better, or if this is the beginning of something worse. In the distance, an owl hoots. You hate that owl. Sleep comes eventually. It always does. Whether it's a healing rest or the fevered sleep of someone about to slip into a weeks-long infection haze, well, that's tomorrow's problem. Morning comes with a slap of cold air and the familiar weight of your own misery. Your jaw is swollen, your pillow damp with drool, and the coppery taste of blood is still clinging to your tongue like a bitter memory. But the day doesn't care. The sun is rising, your lord wants his grain tallied. And the goats won't milk themselves? You peel yourself out of bed and grope for your tunic. It's the same woolen sack you've worn for weeks, maybe months. You gave up keeping track around the same time your blanket started smelling like wet cheese. The fabric's stiff from sweat and dirt, and it creaks a little when you pull it. Over your head, that's normal. It's fashion, medieval style. There's no closet, of course. No hangers, no clean laundry basket. Your entire wardrobe consists of a linen shift, if you're lucky, and a coarse wool tunic. Maybe a belt. Maybe. Not underwear as a theoretical concept. Socks are a dream. If it's cold, you add a second tunic on top. If it's hot, you just suffer. Either way, you stinkin', so does everyone else. You run a hand through your hair, hoping to dislodge the lice without drawing blood. No mirror. Just a vague, reflective smear on a bucket of water. You think your face looks normalish? Maybe. Hard to say. You haven't actually seen yourself properly in months. Mainstream historians agree that for peasants, clothing was functional and minimal. You wore what your village spun and wove, usually undyed wool or linen. Brown, gray, beige. Your entire outfit blends in perfectly with the mud. Fashion wasn't about expression. It was about survival and whatever thread you could afford. You step outside and immediately spot Thomas the Cranky hauling buckets in a tattered tunic that was probably inherited from his grandfather. He waves. You wave back. Neither of you comment on the stains because, again, you both reek. And here's the kicker. Bathing? Not happening today, not this week, maybe not this season. Public bathhouses existed in earlier centuries and even persisted. In some cities during the High Middle Ages, but in many rural areas, especially now, bathing was suspicious. Some believed it opened the pores to disease. Others thought too much cleanliness led to vanity and therefore sin. Historians still argue whether medieval folk bathed less from fear or from pure logistical exhaustion. What had to be chopped. Water hauled, heated, poured into a barrel, and even then, everyone bathed in the same water. By the time it's your turn, it's more soup than solution. One quirky thing you do have is a comb, made of bone, carved by someone with too much time and too few hobbies. It's designed for lice, not vanity. You drag it through your scalp and inspect the teeth. Yep, guests. Again, you sigh and reach for the only grooming product. You've got lye soap, a brittle, grayish puck that smells faintly of tallow and defeat. You rub it on your arms like you're trying to sandpaper yourself into cleanliness. It burns a little. That's normal, but even comforting. You scrape the worst of yesterday's dirt off your neck, splash a little cold water onto your face, and feel mostly the same, but colder. As you go about your morning chores, you notice the steward's daughter walking toward the church inn. A rare blue-dyed dress. It's stunning. Even in the foggy light, it glows like royalty. You realize with a strange ache that it's the only color you've seen this week. That blue, probably Woda plant dye imported at cost and used sparingly. Only someone with status could afford a full garment dyed like that. You're lucky if your tunic matches your socks in stain. And if you think you're dressing down just because you're poor, Think again. The law requires it. Sumptuary laws strictly regulate what you can wear, down to the materials and colors. You couldn't wear silk if you wanted to. Not that you've even seen silk, mind you. You've heard rumors of shimmering cloth from the east that's light as air and soft as a lamb's sigh. Sounds fake, honestly. Historians still argue whether these laws were consistently enforced or mostly symbolic. But one thing's for sure, if a peasant showed up in noble clothing, they'd be fined. Or worse, accused of impersonation, which could lead to some very creative punishments. You keep moving, tugging your hood over your head as the wind picks up. You forgot to patch the elbow of your tunic and now there's a full-on hole. Or skin shows through, pale and goosebumped. Not ideal. But you'll fix it eventually with a thread you plucked from an older. Hole and a needle passed down from your mother's mother. Clothing wasn't disposable. It was repaired, repatched, rewoven until it practically disintegrated. And when it did, you made rags. Then bandages. Then you buried them, because even a rag had more use than you some days. One of the village kids runs by in what looks like an oversized tunic belted with twine, barefoot. Smiling, you chuckle. The innocence of not knowing your ankles are won. Stubbed his toe away from gangrene. As the day wears on, your clothes stiffen with fresh sweat. Your shirt chafes where the seams rub. Your belt digs into your ribs. Your sleeves are too short, but if you roll them up, your arms get sunburned. If you roll them down, you overheat. There is no winning here. Just gradual discomfort with occasional panic about fleas. You notice a dog sniffing the hem of your tunic. Look down, expecting food stains. Nope, just dog curiosity. Maybe he detects the faint scent of your neighbor's pig who rubbed against you yesterday. You let him sniff. He walks away unimpressed. When night falls, you peel your tunic off like a second skin. It smells like wet sheep, smoke, and regret. You hang it near the hearth knot to dry, but to keep it from stiffening into a sculpture. Your under tunic is too filthy to mention. You lie down in it anyway. Tomorrow, you'll put on the same thing again, because that's how it is. One outfit, infinite days. And an ever-expanding collection of invisible bugs. Welcome to medieval fashion. You wear what you are. Tired, itchy, and covered in bits of straw. You wake up sore, itchy, and vaguely annoyed at the world, which means you're right on schedule. The sun is barely above the treetops, and already there's a sharp knock at your door. You don't even bother answering, you know exactly who. It is the steward. Again, he doesn't wait for you to open up. He simply strolls into your yard, like he owns the place. Which, to be fair, he kind of does. Not personally, of course, but on behalf of the lord of the manor and the lord. He definitely owns everything around here, your cottage, your tools, your labor, and technically, even your goat. The steward's holding a scroll and a scowl. Grain tallies light, he says, not even bothering with small talk. And your firewood quota's off. You blink. You haven't even had breakfast yet. Now you're being told more taxes in wood. In the medieval world, taxes come in many charming, creative forms. Crops, chickens, labor, and the occasional wheelbarrow of dung. The lord of the manor you're a local noble doesn't want your gold, you don't have any. He wants your stuff, your wheat, your eggs, your wool, your time, and he'll take it whether you have extra or not. Mainstream historical fact. The feudal system is essentially a giant pyramid of obligation. The king owns the land, grants it to nobles, who grant it to knights, who grant it to peasants like you. In return, you work the land, give up a portion of everything you produce, and smile politely when someone demands your only chicken for the harvest feast. You stammer something about the poor harvest. The steward raises an eyebrow. Well, he says, perhaps the good Lord will be merciful this season, or perhaps he'll take your goat. You don't say anything. Your goat, Maud, is your only source of milk, warmth, and the occasional nuzzle when no one's looking. If she's taken, you're in trouble. The steward marks something on his scroll and leaves. No goodbyes. Just the fading crunch of his boots. In the gravel, you head out to the fields, muttering under your breath, and cross paths with your neighbor Elfric. He's red-faced, breathing hard, and dragging a cart piled high with wool. Extra taxes, he grunts. Lord's throwing. A feast next week. Wants more from everyone? Feast for us, you ask. Elfric laughs so hard he nearly drops a sack of fleece. For him, we get the scraps, if we're lucky. And he's right. We've been to those kinds of feasts before, rather. Near them, the Lord's hall glows with candlelight, filled with venison and song and the sound of expensive laughter. Outside, you get crusts, maybe bones for stew, and if someone's feeling generous, a cup of watered wine. And you're still expected to clap when the minstrels sing about how great the Lord is? One quirky, lesser-known practice. Some nobles would display roasted animals with their fur still birds with feathers artfully reattached purely. For decoration, imagine working 2 weeks in the rain so your landlord can show off a taxidermied pheasant on a platter. Fancy later that day. The the village enforcer comes by to inspect your roof. You know that means he's looking for anything worth taking. He asks about your wife's wool stash, glances at your firewood pile, and makes a few notes. Then he leaves without a word. You find a small sack of barley gone from the shelf that evening. You're not even surprised. Historians still argue whether the lower classes had any formal recourse against these routine exploitations. Technically, you could complain to the manor court, but guess who runs that court? Yep, your lord. It's the one who just threw a party with your potatoes. You feel like a walking purse with a face. You sit by the hearth that night, staring at the empty spot where your chicken coop used to be. It's still technically there, but now it holds fewer chickens than you remember. Your daughter swears she saw a monk bless one earlier today and then walk off with it. Sounds about right. You remember the church tithe too? Yes. The church doesn't let you forget. Every year, you're expected to give 1/10 of everything you own to the church, and not just your crops. 1/10 of your honey, your cheese, your linen, your lambs. You joke that if you had 10 thoughts in a day, the church would demand 1. Some monasteries are fair and even generous in return, offering healing herbs and protection from bandits.
Oh.
But yours? Well, your priest owns more silver goblets than you've seen eggs this season. You try to joke with your wife about it. At least they haven't taken the baby, you mutter. She smirks. Yet taxes are everywhere. You walk, you owe. You build, you owe. You sneeze too loudly, and someone charges you for air displacement. There's no currency for kindness, no refund for hardship. Still, you get up the next morning and start again, because that's what you do. You chop the wood, count the chickens, and wrap an old scarf around your goat's neck, praying no one takes her next. And if the steward comes back, you're ready to fight for her, or at least glare very aggressively. You wake with a tickle in your throat, the kind that makes you cough once, then twice, then, no. You sit up slowly, heart sinking. You know this feeling. Everyone does. It starts with a little chill, a headache, maybe a sore joint hand. Before you know it, you're either dead or being prescribed toad bile tea by the village healer. Welcome to the medieval health plan. Symptoms: panic, prayers, and possibly a frog. You pull your tunic over your clammy skin and step outside, hoping. The crisp air will shake the creeping fog in your head. It doesn't. The sky is leaden, heavy with the kind of clouds that make people mutter about omens. You see a neighbor across the lane lighting bundles of sage and muttering Latin prayers he doesn't understand. Never a good sign. Mainstream. Historians agree that the Middle Ages were a petri dish of pestilence, plague, ergotism, leprosy, sweating sickness. Even a simple fever could take you out like a punch from a celestial blacksmith. And the worst part? No one really knows what's happening. Germ theory won't arrive for centuries. Illness is seen as a punishment from God, the work of evil. Spirits are your body's humors throwing a hissy fit. You rub your temples. Speaking of humors according to the wisdom of the time, you have 4: blood, phlegm, black bile, and yellow bile. Any imbalance causes illness. You've got a headache, too much black bile, lia. Clearly the phlegm's acting up. Remedies vary from leeches to laxatives to, in very special cases, drilling a hole in your skull. No, really trepanation, a centuries-old method of relieving pressure in the brain by removing part of your skull. It's mostly done for seizures and melancholy. I wonder, briefly, how many people survive the procedure versus how many just stop complaining afterward. You shuffle toward the healer's hut. A crooked little building that leans like it's hiding from responsibility. Inside, it smells of garlic, mold, and something herbal but vaguely rotten. The healer, a wiry woman named Idesu, as you walk in. Sore throat, she guesses, not unkindly. Stiff joints? You nod. She gestures to a wooden stool and begins rummaging through baskets filled with dried roots. Bundles of moss, dusty jars. It's what you swear is a mummified squirrel. Plague's not due for another season, she mutters. So you're probably just cursed. You raise an eyebrow. Kidding, she says, not sounding like she is. EDDA boils up a tea made of yarrow, mint, and something that smells suspiciously like boiled feet. She hands it to you. You sip. It's hot, bitter, and vaguely slimy. Grimace. She nods approvingly. That means it's working. You know, it's all guesswork. Even the best medieval healers had no real diagnostic tools. They used taste, touch, smell, and sometimes astrology. Yes, your zodiac sign might determine whether you get dandelion salve or bloodletting with a goose quill. Historians still argue. Whether astrological medicine had practical outcomes or just added flair to otherwise. Random treatments. One quirky remedy Ida swears by is urine divination. She literally smells and studies a patient's pee to diagnose problems. Color, cloudiness, scent all clues. You make a note to never hand her a cup of anything again. You ask if there's a tonic to help you work through the day. She nods and gives you something thick and dark in a clay vial. It tastes like honey mixed with dirt. You don't ask what's in it. You've learned not to ask. You head back to the fields, feeling no better, but slightly more hopeful placebo. Perhaps, or just the fact that someone noticed you exist and didn't immediately demand taxes. But then you hear it a bell, slow, somber. The death knell. You freeze. The church only rings that bell for one reason. Someone's died. People gather. Whispers float through the crowd. The tanner's boy, someone says. Dead by morning. Dead by morning. You feel your own. Cough like a hammer in your chest. The priest arrives, holding a cross and swinging incense. People step back. The church takes over now. Mainstream belief says that death must be warded off. The soul needs safe passage, and the living must protect themselves from contamination. That's why people clutch dried herbs, burn sage, and wear odd little charms around their necks. You've got a clove of garlic in your pocket right now, just in case. You shuffle closer to the funeral pyre. There's no grave today, not enough consecrated ground for everyone, especially if the boy died of something catching. The flames crackle, thick with smoke, and you say a silent prayer. You remember the plague stories. Everyone does. The black. Death isn't happening this year, but the fear never really left. It decimated whole towns, turned families into strangers, and made people bury loved ones in mass pits. The scent of burning rosemary still gives you chills. Historians still argue. Whether plague outbreaks pushed forward, public health policies, or merely drove superstition deeper, either way, the result is the same. Fear, fire, and funerals. Later, you return home and pull your blanket tightly around you. Your throat still burns, your nose is running, and you've developed a suspicious little cough. You think of the tanners. Boy and wonder if your name is next. Still you sleep, because what else can you do? In the medieval world, getting sick isn't a surprise. Staying healthy is, and tomorrow, if you're still breathing, you'll drink more of Edda's sludge. Offer a prayer to Saint Rock, and hope that your humors sort themselves out before someone lights a pyre for you. You wake up disoriented again. This time, it's not because of the cold or hunger, or your neighbor yelling about his missing sheep. No, this time it's because your arms are tied to the bedpost with scratchy rope and there's a priest standing over you with a bucket of holy water. Oh no. You had one bad dream. Maybe you twitched in your sleep. Maybe you mumbled something weird. Maybe you screamed when you woke up coughing and your eyes rolled back a little. It doesn't matter now. Word spread. The healer didn't say he's sick. She said something worse. She said he might be possessed. You try to explain, it's just a fever, you croak. Too much yarrow tea and not enough sleep, but they're not listening. The village priest, Father Aldwin, is all ready, murmuring a prayer in Latin, waving a wooden crucifix like he's swatting flies. Your aunt is in the corner crying, and the butcher is whispering that he saw your eyes glow. They didn't, but facts aren't what anyone's here for. Mainstream. Historical fact: the medieval church held firm to the belief that demons could enter the human body and cause everything from seizures to depression. You're not considered unwell. You're considered occupied. That's not good for your social life, or your odds of not being burned. Your left wrist burns as the rope chafes. The priest dabs oil on your forehead and says something about St. Benedict. You recognize the ritual. It's a minor exorcism, more of a test, really. If you scream, thrash, or say anything impolite, that'll be confirmation. The real exorcism follows. The crowd outside your cottage is growing. You hear someone say, "Remember what happened to Agnes?" Tried to explain that she just fainted from standing in church too long. Agnes, who now lives 2 towns over, partially because of the shame, partially because her old house mysteriously caught fire. Your cousin leans in with a cloth soaked in vinegar, whispers, "Just pretend to be cured." You nod slightly. A plan. The priest splashes you. You gasp, but gently. Wait. You sigh and whisper, "Thank you, Father." You even throw in a weak amen for good measure. He squints at you. The crowd holds its breath. Then he nods. The spirit is leaving him. He declares relief washes over the room like hot broth. You're untied slowly. Your wrists are raw. But you're alive. Historians still argue whether the church truly believed every illness was demonic, or whether possession was just a tidy box for everything they couldn't explain. Either way, the treatment was the same: fasting, prayers, isolation, and sometimes worse. Later, once you're alone, your sister sneaks in with a slice of bread and a hug. "They really thought you had a devil," she says with a half laugh. "Maybe just a really bad cold." You smile faintly. 8. Inside, your mind's still reeling, because you did feel something strange. Not demonic possession, no, but a despair that wrapped itself around your bones and didn't let go. You hadn't eaten well in days. Your dreams had turned violent. You thought about running away, about ending things, and there it is. You realize something chilling. In medieval times, there is no word for depression, no anxiety, no mental health. If you're sad, you're sinful. If you're anxious, you lack faith. If you're too withdrawn or jittery, people talk. If you cry too much, they pray. And if you say the wrong thing out loud, they tie you to the bedpost. Quirky fringe belief. In some regions, people blamed fairies for mental illness. Yes, mischievous sprites who'd steal your soul or replace you with a changeling. The solution: hang iron charms, burn herbs, or if you were truly desperate, leave someone outside overnight to trick the fairies into swapping them back. Not ideal. You pass the next day in silence. No one says much. A few villagers nod stiffly. Most avoid eye contact. You're officially better, but that doesn't mean they trust you. One more bad night, and you're back in holy water territory. You keep your head down. You sweep the cottage, feed the goat, and hum softly to yourself to prove your sanity. And when you feel that familiar tightness behind your eyes, stress, sadness, or both, you bury it deep. Because in the medieval world, emotions are dangerous, and the only safe feeling is silence. You wake up disoriented. Again, this time it's not because of the cold or hunger, or your neighbor yelling about his missing sheep. No, this time it's because your arms are tied to the bedpost with scratchy rope and there's a priest standing over you with a bucket of holy water. Oh no, you had one bad dream. Maybe you twitched in your sleep. Maybe you mumbled something weird. Or maybe you screamed when you woke up coughing and your eyes rolled back a little. It doesn't matter now. Word spread. The healer didn't say he's sick. She said something worse. She said he might be possessed. You try to explain it's just a fever. You croak. Too much yarrow tea and not enough sleep, but they're not listening. The village priest, Father Aldwin, is all ready, murmuring a prayer in Latin, waving a wooden crucifix like he's swatting flies. Your aunt is in the corner crying, and the butcher is whispering that he saw your eyes glow. They didn't, but facts aren't what anyone's here for. Mainstream. Historical fact. The medieval church held firm to the belief that demons could enter the human body and cause everything from seizures to depression. You're not considered unwell. You're considered occupied. That's not good for your social life, or your odds of not being burned. Your left wrist burns as the rope chafes. The priest dabs oil on your forehead and says something about Saint Benedict. You recognize the ritual. It's a minor exorcism more. Of a test, really. If you scream, thrash, or say anything impolite, that'll be confirmation. The real exorcism follows. The crowd outside your cottage is growing. You hear someone say, "Remember what happened to Agnes?" Oh yes. Agnes who? Tried to explain that she just fainted from standing in church too long. Agnes, who now lives 2 towns over, partially because of the shame, and partially because her old house mysteriously caught fire. Your cousin leans in with a cloth soaked in vinegar. He whispers, "Just pretend to be cured." You nod slightly. A plan? The priest splashes you. You gasp but gently. You sigh and whisper, "Thank you, Father." You even throw in a weak amen for good measure. He squints at you. The crowd holds its breath. Then he nods. The spirit is leaving him. He declares. Relief washes over the room like hot broth. You're untied, slowly. Your wrists are raw, but you're alive. Historians still argue whether the church truly believed every illness was demonic, or whether possession was just a tidy box for everything they couldn't explain. Either way, the treatment was the same. Fasting, prayers, isolation, and sometimes worse. Later, once you're alone, your sister sneaks in with a slice of bread and a hug. "They really thought you had a devil," she says with a half laugh. Maybe just a really bad cold. You smile faintly. Inside, your mind's still reeling, because you did feel something strange. Not demonic possession, no. But a despair that wrapped itself around your bones and didn't let go. You hadn't eaten well in days. Your dreams had turned violent. You thought about running away, about ending things, and there it is. You realize something chilling. In medieval times, there is no word for depression, no anxiety, no mental health. If you're sad, you're sinful. If you're anxious, you lack faith. If you're too withdrawn or jittery, people talk. If you cry too much, they pray. And if you say the wrong thing out loud, they tie you to the bedpost. Quirky fringe belief. In some regions, people blamed fairies for mental illness. Just mischievous sprites who'd steal your soul or replace you with a changeling. Solution. Hang iron charms, burn herbs, or if you were truly desperate, we'll leave someone outside. Overnight to trick the fairies into swapping them back, not ideal. You pass the next day in silence. No one says much. A few villagers nod stiffly. Most avoid eye contact. You're officially better, but that doesn't mean they trust you. One more bad night, and you're back in holy water territory. You keep your head down. You sweep. The cottage, feed the goat, and hum softly to yourself to prove your sanity. And when you feel that familiar tightness behind your eyes, stress, sadness, or both, you bury it deep. Because in the medieval world, emotions are dangerous, and the only safe feeling is silence. The village matchmaker stops by right after your lunch of stale rye bread and onion broth. She's holding a bundle of herbs, which seems like a good sign until she says therefore warding off fertility spirits. You don't ask questions, you nod politely. Apparently, it's time to talk about your future. Specifically, your future spouse, or rather the person your parents will select. With a bit of help from the local gossip circuit and the family's goose-owning status, that's right, it's medieval matchmaking, where romance comes second, property comes first, and feelings. Best left out of it. You're 15. Old enough. Too old, some would say. There's a girl from the next village over. Her family owns a good patch of barley field and 2 cows. You've met her once. She sneezed and ran away. Perfect. Mainstream historical fact. In medieval Europe, marriages were usually arranged by families, often while the couple was still in early adolescence. The church required consent. Consent was loosely interpreted, especially if your father already gave a goat to the bride's uncle. You try to argue? What if I'm not ready? you ask. The matchmaker blinks. What's ready? Got to do with it? You attempt a bold strategy. What if I want to fall in love first? She squints at you. With your wife? Okay, point taken. Romantic love, as you understand it, is largely irrelevant here. Courtly love, the stuff of poetry and lute songs, is something nobles indulge in, usually outside of marriage. For common folk, love is more of a practical arrangement. Does she have good hips? Okay, can she carry a bucket and swat pigs simultaneously? That's love, baby. So now, you're engaged. You didn't get down on one knee. You didn't even get to carve a heart into a tree. No, your family shook hands with. Another family mumbled a blessing. And now there's a girl you'll be married to in a few months. Probably once the oats are harvested. To celebrate, your mother gives you a pair of wool socks. Your future in-laws send a chicken. The chicken does not seem thrilled. You meet your fiancée again at the weekly market. She says hello and hands you a turnip. You say thank you and panic a little. She's wearing a linen cap and has a visible scar on her arm, probably from a plow. You pretend not to notice. Later that week, you attend what counts as a medieval wedding for someone else. It's not glamorous. There's no cake. There is, however, a lot of ale, and a drunk uncle loudly insisting the couple kiss so we know it's real. You learn two things. First, the ceremony happens in front of the church doors. Not inside only. After that can you enter for the blessing. Second, the wedding night involves an audience. Not in the room, thankfully, but people definitely hover. Quirky fringe custom. In some regions, it was normal for the village to escort the newlyweds to bed with singing, cheering, and sometimes checking the sheets the next morning for proof of, well, consummation. Yep, that's how serious they were about legitimacy. You're now terrified. Historians still argue whether commoners felt truly trapped by arranged marriages or simply accepted them as another cog in the feudal machine. Some sources suggest that affection often grew over time, while others point to countless records of people fleeing bad unions, seeking annulments, or more commonly running off with the blacksmith. You think of running, just for a moment. But then you remember that your feet are blistered, your food pouch is empty. And the next town over once burned a man for sneezing on a Sunday, so you stay. One afternoon, your betrothed visits to help your mother churn butter. You try to impress her by chopping wood and almost lose a toe. She doesn't laugh, which is somehow more embarrassing than if she had. Still, she leaves behind a small pouch of dried lavender. For your pillow, she mumbles. It's the first gift she's given you that isn't a root vegetable. You smile. Maybe this won't be so bad. Maybe until then, there are chores to do, dowries to negotiate, and an awkward pre-wedding confession to make, because apparently you once looked too long at the baker's daughter and now Father Aldwin wants to have a word. Courtship in the medieval era isn't about falling head over heels. It's about surviving long enough to merge livestock and inherit your neighbor's turnip cart. Still, as you lie awake that night, lavender beneath your head and wedding talk. In your ears, you allow yourself a rare luxury in this brutal world. Hope, and just maybe a little love. You're woken at dawn by a sound you never want to hear again, the panicked, nasal shriek of your neighbor's boy yelling, "There's a fire." Your legs are moving before your eyes fully open. You grab the water bucket, half frozen at the top and bolt outside, feet hitting the muddy ground like a dropped sack of stones. Smoke curls up from the carpenter's workshop, which is unfortunately also the carpenter's house. Flames flicker behind the tiny shutters like candlelight on a rampage. By the time you and the others form a human chain to pass buckets from the village well, it's already too late. The roof caves in with a crash like thunder and embers scatter across the yard. Everyone falls silent. All you can do is watch mainstream historical fact. Medieval homes, especially among peasants, were built of timber, thatch, and wattle and daubel, highly flammable materials. A single spark from a hearth or candle could turn a cottage into ash in minutes. Firefighting? That was mostly desperation and buckets. You've seen 3 house fires in your short life. This is the first where no one dies. Still, the damage is catastrophic. The carpenter loses his tools, his stored grain, and every bit of wool his wife had been spinning all winter. They're safe, but they're ruined. There's no insurance, no rebuilding fund, no emergency lodging. You and your sister Cleary. Space in the loft so they can sleep under your roof for now. Right next to the chickens and a goat that does not respect personal space. The next morning, you help dig through the ashes. You find half a hammerhead in a bowl with a scorched bottom. Your fingers are blistered and you cough from the smoke. And yet there's no question everyone shows up to help, because next time it could be you. The fire is a stark reminder. Life here is fragile. One accident and you're set back a decade assuming you survive. It's also a reminder that every skill in this place, every trade, every tool is essential. No one here is just anything. The carpenter doesn't just make chairs, he makes handles for your hose, wheels for your carts, and coffins when needed. That night, someone lights a torch outside the blacksmith's and starts hammering out. Nails. Rebuilding has already begun. It always does. Quirky tidbit. Some villages posted signs warning against cooking after dark or banned candles entirely after sunset, relying instead on glowing hearth embers and sheer luck. In a few places, people believed witches started fires and carried amulets of rosemary to cool the flames. There's even a story of a town that sacrificed a goat every spring to keep the fire spirits appeased. Goats never really had a fair shot in these stories. The fire's not the only threat looming this season. There are wolves in the forest. The Reeve said so, and he's not usually the type to exaggerate. A few sheep have gone missing, and last week a traveler stumbled into town with a torn sleeve and wild eyes. They watched me. He kept muttering, didn't move. Just watched. Wolves are bold in winter, desperate. You double bolt the door each night now. Pray that the pig doesn't attract attention then, of course. There's the weather itself. It's been snowing every few days, just enough to keep the paths icy and the roofs. It's groaning under weight. You once thought snow was magical? You were very wrong. Snow means work. You sweep it off the thatch before it collapses. You haul water because the stream's frozen. You chop firewood until your hands go numb and your axe handle splinters. Historians still argue whether medieval people were tougher or simply more resigned to misery. Either way, cozy winter is not a thing here. There's no hot cocoa, no Netflix, no thermal socks. There's just you, your goat, and a constant state of mild frostbite. One night, while feeding the fire, you nearly drop the tongs. Your hands are trembling. From cold, yes, but also from hunger. Your family is down to turnips, dried beans, dang, and a few hunks of old cheese that smell like tragedy. You think back to the summer, when the harvest looked promising before the early frost, before the mold, before the rats. Now, the food stores look like a sad joke. Your mother tries to stretch the meals. Thin porridge, baked turnip peels, bread that could chip a tooth. Famine isn't declared, just happens, and still, people laugh. A little, they tease each other at the well. Someone plays a flute on Sundays. A child draws something in the ash with a stick and calls it a dragon. Life doesn't stop here, it just limps. You remember the carpenter ash-streaked and exhausted, saying, well, now I've got room for an extension. You laughed. So did everyone else. Sometimes that's all you can do. Because fire takes, winter takes, wolves take, but humor. That's free, and somehow it warms more than your fire ever could. You're jolted awake by the clamor of voices outside your door. Today is market day in your village. Market day doubles as Justice Day.
Down.
That means everyone's expected to gather on the green, not just to trade turnips for ale, but to watch your neighbors prove their innocence or confess their crimes in front of the whole dang world. And spoiler alert, it's rarely dignified. You trudge across the frost-hardened grass, teeth chattering despite your best efforts at layering. Tunics. A crowd's already formed around a muddy pond-your local trial by ordeal site. You'd hoped your daily hazards were limited to rats, taxes, and chewing your own wooden spoon. But here you are, about to watch someone risk drowning to settle a dispute. Medieval justice, you remind yourself, is a spectator sport. Mainstream. Historians note that trial by ordeal, such as drowning, burning, carrying hot irons, was sanctioned by both church and crown until the 13th century. Based on the belief that divine intervention would protect the innocent, you watch a man dragged forward, his arms pinned behind him. He's accused of stealing grain. The bailiff explains the rules. Plunge him into the pond. If he floats, he's guilty God's judgment, and if he sinks, he's innocent. So long as someone's ready to pull him up before he drowns, it's a win-win, unless you're involved. You wince as his boots slip off mid-dunk, revealing pale calves that look like they've never seen daylight or a pair of socks. He thrashes once, twice, and then surprise, he floats. Guilty as charged. The bailiff hauls him out before he can crow that the Lord has indeed judged him. Villagers shout approval, delighted by the spectacle. The man's mouth gags on cold. Water and mud, and he's immediately shackled and led off to repay his debt. No trial transcripts. No defense attorney, just a floating test and a hearty slap on the wrist. You look away, stomach churning. Then you notice another scene. A woman accused of slander must hold a red-hot iron bar and walk 9 paces. Historians still argue whether these trials ever really proved innocence or guilt, or if they were simply tools of intimidation wielded by the powerful. Nevertheless, she grips the glowing metal and staggers, blisters and burned flesh sprouting like mushroom's butt. Completes the walk. She's declared innocent, but you're pretty sure she'll be limping for weeks between these trials. There's a bizarre little contest where men accused of lying must eat a dry communion wafer without water. One unlucky fellow is forced to gulp down an entire month's worth of stale wafers, technically sacramental, but scraped from church shelves that had no other use. His jaw locks, his eyes water, and he breaks out in a coughing fit so epic it sounds like an accordion in a funeral march. The crowd laughs, and you bite your lip to stop joining in. Justice is equal parts absurd and terrifying. One quirky fringe. Tidbit. In some regions, those accused of witchcraft underwent the baking cake test, where they had to bake a loaf using only a handful of ingredients and no salt because evil can't bake. If the bread rose properly, you're innocent. If it stayed flat, you were probably consorting with demons. You're not sure which is worse, the fear of being accused of witchcraft or the taste of unsalted bread. The bailiff's gavel bangs. There's one more case today. Your turn, probably. The goat was stolen, and the ladder of suspicion points back to you. You swallow, tasting last night's turnip stew still clinging to your tongue. You'd like to protest, but you remember how. The steward took Maud, your prized goat, last season for overproducing milk that he claimed violated his dairy rights. You retrieved her only after half the village chipped in a goat-sized ransom. Your palms sweat under your tunic. The accuser steps forward, a man whose field you once crossed to fetch stray chickens. He claims he saw you near his barn. You stammer that you were merely tidying it. He scoffs. Thief. Before you can correct him, the bailiff announces your ordeal. Confession or combat. If you confess, you lose half your belongings. If you fight your accuser, blood will be spilled, probably. Your own. You glance at the pond, the hot iron, the stale wafers. None looks appealing. You opt for confession. Better to lose a few possessions than to chance a watery grave or burned hands. You kneel in the mud, head bowed. The bailiff lists the items. You forfeit your wool tunic, one of your few socks, and the cracked wooden spoon, your grandmother's spoon. I wince as it's pried from your belt. A hush falls. The spoon clatters into a basket with other criminal spoils. You feel naked, less because you've lost fabric, and more because something sacred just vanished. You stand numb. While the crowd's gossip hums around you like flies, mainstream practice held that public shaming was as important as punishment. It's self-designed to deter crime and reinforce social order. Great, you think, social order is? Intact and you're cold, hungry, and spoonless, you wander toward home, wondering how you'll eat tonight. Without a spoon, you'll have to gnaw on bread like a rabbit. Your goat stares at you with sympathetic eyes, as if to say, I told you. To hide better. You pat her neck, grateful she wasn't the target yet. On the way back, you pass the pond. The water's still dark, waiting. You shiver and look away. You've learned enough about medieval justice today. It's messy, it's cruel, and it's never dull. Back in your cottage, you sit on the bench and cradle the stump where your spoon used to hang. Your tunic is gone too, leaving you in layers of scratchy linen that itched like crazy. You'll need to trade at the next market, borrow from a neighbor, or go without. And Maud, she's fine. She nuzzles your side, reminding you that if you're lucky, the worst thing you lose today is a spoon. Tomorrow, the steward might come demanding more fines. Or maybe there'll be another trial. You steel yourself. You've survived drowning, fire, wolf scares, demon scares, and teeth explosions. Losing a spoon feels like a minor inconvenience in comparison. You rise and fetch a half-melted candle. You blow out the hearth embers and wrap your cloak tighter. Sleep beckons. You'll need all your strength, medieval justice has shown you. One clear truth. Here, fairness equates to spectacle. And innocence is as fragile as a loaf of unsalted bread as you settle onto your straw mattress. Whisper to the darkness, please let tomorrow bring something less absurd like taxes. Or lice. Or maybe a mild stomachache. Anything but a trial by ordeal. You're awoken this time not by goats, not by cold, not even by the chronic aching in your back. It's the sound of hoofbeats, many of them, and shouting. That's never good. In medieval times, shouting rarely means good news. It usually means plague, tax collectors, or war. Today, it's war. You blink against the sunrise just enough to make out the colors of a nobleman's crest one you don't recognize, blazoned on the tunics of a dozen mounted men. The steward calls for every able-bodied man and boy. You look around, but there's nowhere to hide. You're conscripted, just like that. There's no briefing, no gear handout. Just a rough wooden spear shoved into your hands and a barked. Order. You march today? Mainstream historical fact. Conscription was often sudden, brutal, and mandatory. Local lords could summon villagers to serve in feudal levies with almost no warning. Sometimes you were promised food, silver, or laughably glory. Most times you got death, dysentery, or both. Your mother doesn't cry. She just tightens the belt around your tunic and shoves a stale loaf into your hands. Don't be stupid. She says that's her version of I love you. By noon, you're in a ragged line of 20 villagers, all holding mismatched weapons. You spot a rusted pitchfork, 2 axes more suited for wood than war, and 1 short bow held by a man who admits he's never fired an arrow sober. You march for hours. Through mud, past fields, across a cold river that soaks your only pair of shoes. By dusk, you've reached a clearing where your training begins. It's less a boot camp and more a chaotic disaster rehearsal. An old soldier missing an Iriel's instructions in a dialect none of you fully understand. Form a line, he shouts. Someone asks which way's the front. A silence, then groans. Quirky tidbit. There are real medieval records of peasants using sides backwards in battle because no one told them which way to hold it. One guy swung it like a club, yelling death to weeds. No one's quite sure if he was joking or simply panicking. That night, you sleep under a tarp held up by sticks in despair. It's not cold exactly, just wet. Everything is wet. Your socks, your cloak, your dignity. Rain trickles through the holes in the tarp. Someone is snoring. Someone else is praying in Latin, adly. Historians still argue whether peasant levies made any meaningful difference in medieval battles. Some claim they were essential backup to the elite knight class. Others suggest they were more like noisy speed bumps meant to slow the enemy down while the nobles figured things out. Either way, you're now officially a mobile, muddy speed bump. The first skirmish arrives before you've learned how to tie your cloak properly. You're roused by the sound of a horn and shoved into position. Your formation is nothing more than a scattered clump of villagers, trying to look brave while clutching bent farm tools. Across the field, you see real soldiers. Shiny helmets, polished shields, organized lines. They look terrifying. They are terrifying. A trumpet blows. You charge. Wait, you charge. Apparently, yes. You run. You scream because everyone else is screaming, and you raise your spear like someone who's seen a painting of battle once. You don't even make it halfway across the field before tripping over a stone and landing in a puddle of something. That might be sheep dung. Good news, that probably saved your life. While arrows fly overhead, you're safely embedded in the dirt, clinging to your dignity like it's your last gold coin. The chaos ends as fast as it began. Somehow, your side wins, or at least isn't obliterated. Lost 2 villagers and 1 goat, who somehow joined the charge. Nobody knows why. Later, a knight rides by and congratulates you on your bravery. Fine spirit, he says. You're still face down in the mud, trying to extract your spoon from your belt. Yes, you made a new one. Priorities. The next few days, blur together march. Dig latrines more, shouting endless stew made of something suspiciously chewy. War, it turns out, is a lot of waiting, sweating, and wondering why your boots smell like fermented turnips. You pick up strange tricks, like stuffing moss into your boots to stop blisters, or using your spear to dry your underclothes over a fire. You learn which trees make decent shelter, and which ones drip sap directly onto your face while you sleep. The enemy you were. Fighting, still unclear. You think someone insulted someone's cousin, or there was a dispute about a river, or maybe someone stole a pig. Medieval wars often had hilariously vague origins. Historians even now debate the cause of some battles that lasted years. Was it trade, religion, or just boredom? They ask, all you know is, you miss your goat. Eventually, you're sent home not with fanfare, not even with a thank you. Just an offhanded grunt from the steward and a dismissive wave. You limp back to your village thinner, dirtier, and with a whole new set of rashes. You expect a hero's welcome. Instead, you get a lecture from your neighbor about leaving the woodpile uncovered. The pigs are rooting in the garden again, and someone's eaten the last of the cheese. Life didn't pause while you were await, just shuffled on. You drop your makeshift spear by the door. You're home now, because next time, it might be another war, or worse, jury duty.